大家好，欢迎大家来到今日点击的特别节目《坦克人的故事》。那我是石涛。上期节目跟大家概述过一个整个的概况，提到坦克人的故事，就想起了我印象中大概是在5月底左右。当时的发生的事情的时候是在东直门外面，东直门2环路立交桥的左侧，我忘了那叫什么东直门斜街啊，还是东直门小街，我忘了那条路了。但那是条斜路。在那天的大概下午2点多钟，我从那儿过的时候，在那条小路上停了大概7、8辆坦克。大家这里想提醒大家注意，坦克当时进入2环路之前，在那个时间段里面是从小路过来的，他没有从当时东直门那条交道口那条路直接穿过来。那在坦克周围的邻居、周围的老百姓、周围的大姐、大嫂、大妈们，就跟这些军人在讲。我印象中当时大概围了100多人。那大家呢，其实心里头都多少有些打鼓，因为那是坦克呀。那在这种讲话的过程当中呢，突然不知道谁说了一声，说坦克过来了。那在立交桥两侧的人瞬间就跑散了，这是我亲身经历的。那在6月3号的晚上，我记得原来我跟大家讲过那故事。我从城里到了三元桥，从三元桥往上上3环路的这个出口处的时候，我往上走，突然从上面一辆军车，东风，应该是东风军车，这个东风啊，那个大的卡车，不是130，军人一排，那个后面的那个车厢那儿，它有这么大的那个木头栏杆，大概3条，拿着枪，就这么对着我，一排人。我印象非常清晰，那是晚上大概9点半到10点钟。我不敢抬头，但是我的所有的注意力都在枪口上。车这么来，我这么往上上，就这么擦肩而过了。6月3号的晚上，那个时候在木樨地已经开枪了。我们去年的那期节目跟大家介绍的时候，我们采访过当时一位叫做王公石的先生，那他当时就在木樨地现场，他讲当时开枪的时间大概在9点半左右。我们后来汇集到的所有的资料也是这么个资料。所以坦克人是谁？当时的北京人，只要怀有基本的人性的一面，每一个人其实都曾经在坦克面前经历过。因为在当时的北京城所有的四周都有坦克车包围的。那坦克人是谁？
I realized that the Public Security Bureau had been watching us from the other rooftop by binoculars. So I went in and took the film out of the camera and reloaded it into the plastic film can. And went into the toilet, took off the top of the toilet and put it in the holding tank, put the toilet top back on. And shortly after that, probably 10, 15 minutes afterwards, the Public Security Bureau broke through the door. They got one other roll of film from the shots that I'd taken from the night before, and they were pretty satisfied they'd cleaned up the situation. About a day and a half later, I worked my way back through the back streets of the Beijing Hotel, and luckily nobody had flushed the toilet.
So one of the most famous photographs of the 20th century was floating in the top of a lavatory.
Floating in the top of the toilet, and possibly it could have been literally flushed, yeah.
Images of that extraordinary confrontation became icons of freedom. They have been reproduced on T-shirts and posters ever since. President Bush commended his courage, and leaders the world over hailed him. He became an inspiration to millions, and he changed lives forever.
For all my years conducting investigation of human rights abuses, I never forgot this young man who stood in front of tanks. It's not only me never forgot. The world did not forget him.
I spent, years in the labor camp. I confronted the regime also in the labor camp. That image actually played a key role to me.
He wanted to change China, but what he did was help to change the Soviet Union. I went to a number of countries in Eastern Europe before the Berlin Wall came down, and I was complimenting their courage. They said, if that kid in China stood in front of those tanks, we can do what we're doing. What this young man did was in effect change the world.
Within minutes of his incredible act of defiance, Tankman was hustled away, by whom we do not know, and vanished. And still we have no idea of his fate or who he was. But to some it appears he was not a student, more likely an ordinary working man.
He didn't look at all like a student. He looked like someone on his way to work, or who just knocked off and was on his way home, doing the shopping on the way home. In a sense, he stood for the ordinary people.
The protests that climaxed with the Tankman's lonely act of defiance had begun 5 weeks earlier with a mass student demonstration, and in most Western media continued to be treated as a student phenomenon. But there's much more to this story. The students had touched a nerve, and soon everyone seemed to be out there protesting against hardship, government corruption, and 40 years of repression. In Tiananmen Square and on the streets of Beijing, in cities right across China, there were tens of millions of tankmen. Whole swathes of the country were in open revolt.
In Beijing, 1 in 10 of the population was joining in. And that includes all the old people, all the little children. So it was massive.
There were people in heavy earth-moving equipment. Honey bucket collectors in a tank truck came in. There were the pilots, there were hotel workers. It was just a carnival of protest. All the groups were out there with their own banners saying, "We are the Beijing journalists. We demand press freedom. We demand the right to tell the truth."
You had doctors and nurses and scientists and army people demonstrating. The Chinese Navy was demonstrating. And I thought, this is extraordinary, because who's left? It's just the top leaders who aren't out there.
People thought that the old regime was somehow about to fall. And indeed, it was hard to imagine how it could be otherwise at that moment.
For the very first time, press and television were reporting freely and truthfully. The virus of freedom quickly spread.
You could feel something uncontrollable building. And of course, from there, it moved outward across the country.
Uprisings occurred all over China, in at least 400 cities. We know this from the Chinese press and from their own military museum, all the way from Mongolia in the northwest down to the southeast near Hong Kong.
And from these cities, hundreds of thousands of supporters converged on the capital. The students had started the protest hoping to cleanse the party of graft and corruption and encourage free speech. They sought reform, not revolution. After all, they were, by and large, the children of the elite. But as the movement spread outwards to the middle classes and then to the workers and peasants, attitudes hardened.
The move from student uprising to a worker uprising is what really scared the Chinese government. They felt that they could deal with the students. After all, students had been involved in uprising for many, many years. But where it became dangerous to the stability and to the survival of the Communist Party was when ordinary workers became involved.
After all, the Chinese Communist Party had originally used the workers' movement to gain power for itself. Now those in government were terrified that we'd take it back from them.
那看过这段照片之后，我相信很多朋友都非常感慨。20世纪震惊全球的最珍贵的一张照片，被藏在了马桶里面。那就是当时真实的场面。在我看到这段视频的时候，我心里非常感叹。感叹什么呢？感叹当时的科技没有现在这么发达。那个时候必须使用胶片呐，必须使用柯达的或者富士的胶片。如果今天都是使用低这头的照相机，那这张照片就留不下了。